we're talking about sports here. So are you all staying after this amazing Milken conference to watch the race? Susie, are you staying?
Well, given my job, I think I need to stay for sure.
Jamie, are you going to stay?
So I was just in Qatar, in Doha. So I went to the race there, and I'm going to go over to the race sometime today and maybe tomorrow. Not Sunday, because I want to go home to see my family, because I haven't been there for a while.
Well, it's amazing with the backdrop of the F1 race that's going on. Danny, how would you describe today's sports investment ecosystem, as one would say, especially in the Middle East, Europe, and across the board? There's $60 billion worth of capital that's flowing from the region. You all have made some significant investments, whether it be PFL or PTO. Would you describe the Middle East region as the Silicon Valley of sports?
I never thought of it like that, but what do you think?
Look, it's very interesting what's going on, obviously, in the Middle East. There's a lot of money pouring in to the Middle East on the sports side of the business. Everything that they're doing here, they're doing really well. The tracks are good, the entertainment is good, the hospitality is good. And when you really look at the sports business, you need all the different attributes to actually make that all work. And the Middle East is actually doing an unbelievable job doing it. And I think that what people have to realize is it all works, but it works because there's an enormous amount of content that comes with sport. Sport's the only thing that really is working these days, from a media standpoint, because it's live. But there's a ton of content behind all the different sports, whether it is NFL or whether it is F1. And I think that's why we're seeing, a big rise in sport, and why there's so much money now chasing this category.
And Danny, what about yourself? I mean, you all have made significant investments. You moved just to the region 2 years ago in order to sort of direct your efforts towards doing so. How has that been, and how has it grown?
Yeah, obviously, Saudi Arabia has got a lot of ambition and a lot of capacity and conviction to meet that ambition. And I've been there just over 2 years now. And as you said, we've made a number of investments in global sport. I think the diversification of the economy in Saudi Arabia is a key focus of the Crown Prince, and obviously sport plays a role, not just in what it does from an entertainment perspective, but also from well-being metrics that the country's seeking. But I think going back to your original question more broadly around sport and as an asset class, I think people tend to think it's new. It's not. Like, family offices have been investing in sport now for 30, 40 years. But it's new probably from an institutional investment perspective, and I think that's where quite often you think that all of a sudden institutional investors like sovereign wealths like ourselves suddenly woke up one day and thought sport might be a good place to invest. I think it's probably the other way around. In our observation is that sport needs capital. Sport is going through an enormously challenging economic environment right now, with the shifting in media consumption away from linear broadcast that the industry has survived on for 30, 40 years to direct-to-consumer digital engagement with customers, and the arbitrage between those two monetization channels is very difficult to fill. Therefore, sports is requiring capital in order to prepare itself for that seismic shift. So I think there's a bit about sport being in need of capital to coincide with the fact that institutional investors think there's growth to be had in sporting assets.
And Ben, coming from your investments in Silicon Valley to now your investments within the Middle East, how have you seen your deployment of capital sort of change the way that people, whether the way that they perceive or whether they understand the Middle East, and how has that affected and how has that changed the way that you looked at the games that you've invested in?
I think the geopolitical poles of the world have shifted, and the Middle East has now become the new Switzerland, and we see that across politics, business. You have equal parts Americans, Chinese, Russians, all nationalities kind of convening here. This audience is representative of, the world is fixated on the Middle East over this kind of month, be it from a political kind of interchange perspective and certainly from sport. the region, I think, is also benefiting from what I would call kind of late mover advantage in sport, where a lot of the incumbent leagues have kind of gone out into the world and exhausted themselves. And if I were to kind of go short or long various leagues and sports, a lot of European football, even to me, feels like it's on the decline. The French league is on the decline. The Italian league is on the decline. And so what that gives the Middle East is this kind of late mover advantage where you're flush with capital, exuberance, and also recognize the geopolitical importance of sport, which is that it has an outsized seat at the table when it comes to convening, when it comes to geopolitical influence, and kind of they recognize that. And so they are strategically putting capital behind sport now to bring it here. And so, it's every day here. There's a Super Cup going on. There's a Sail GP race. There's a Formula One race. There's an Arab Cup. There's an Intercontinental Cup. I mean, the world of sport is here outside of, I think, our home in the United States. And so for us as investors, that's incredibly exciting because we can, alongside of folks like Dhani, invest in not only kind of these emergent leagues like the SPL, which I think is today already a top 5 football league globally, but also disruptive sports like Kings Leagues and others that are taking a look at the deficiencies of global sport today and saying we can remake those in the image of a kind of a digital native consumer's behavior pattern, and therefore that just gives us huge outsized return and influence by centering that here in the region.
I mean, if I were to attend all the sporting events in the Middle East, I wouldn't be home at all. So when you think, Ben and Susie, I'm also curious your thoughts. When you think about the value and the origination of it all, right? And you think about these teams, where does it truly start? Do you think it's the brand? Do you think it's the players? Do you think it's the leagues? Do you think it's the investors? Because I can start to see the dynamics start to shift, right? Sometimes owners step to the front. Sometimes teams step to the front. Sometimes the region steps to the front. How would you evaluate who really defines the value in these teams? Ben and then Susie.
I think from my perspective, just from a football only perspective, the challenge is if you're investing in sports in, say, the United States, I think a lot more of it is an equity play. You're investing in an NFL team, and I think there's a general consensus that most NFL teams are going to be worth $10 billion within the next few years. It's not true of global football, where we have promotion, relegation. We have a huge array of different clubs across the world, millions of players at any time in play to be brought into clubs. And so we don't have that kind of finite universe like you have in the US. And so for us, most clubs we're looking at, we don't underwrite much value to their equity. And if I could actually take over clubs almost in an asset-light way where I don't spend dead money to acquire a club, my view is that equity appreciation is minimal, especially if you're already at the top of the game. And so for us, we make our money through largely player trading, which is something, again, that isn't an asset class or a revenue stream that's as important in the United States. And so that's where we can kind of underwrite returns using outsized data science capabilities, innovative scouting, and then of course player development through our academies. That's where I ascribe value for our brands, and then unlocking new revenue streams, be it improved consumer kind of experience, social media. But for us on the football side, we're pretty secular that we think we make our money through player trading and not equity appreciation.
And Susie, how do you all make your money through the F1 Academy, and how do you think the origination of brand, and where does it really start?
Well, I think you have to rewind 6 years ago, and the Formula One teams were not making any money. There's an old saying in motorsport, the more you spend, the faster you go. And they were being propped up by the big manufacturers who saw the platform as a great opportunity to try and sell more cars. Then came along the pandemic, and the Formula One teams were then doubting their survival when they couldn't go racing. And the governing body, which had been spoken about for so many years, were able to introduce a cost cap, which actually limited the amount of money that the teams were able to spend in Formula One. And that massively changed the game, because suddenly the teams were profitable, certainly the teams at the front, and that then made them into great assets. And of course, there are only 10, now soon to be 11, Formula One teams in the world, which means they're also seen now as a bit of a trophy asset. So I think in Formula One, 6 years ago, there were teams not even surviving to make it onto the grid, and now there's $6 billion valuations, and investors are very much looking to Formula One. It's one of the very few sports in the world that's global, and it's now become something culturally relevant as opposed to just a sporting event. And now you see so many brands wanting to turn up, and you speak about the race this weekend, you cannot get a ticket. You know, it's become sold out in so many areas, and just 6 years ago we would have empty grandstands. So we can be very grateful for how the sport has progressed, and I think it's up to us to make sure that this new younger fan base, of which 42% is female, they're able to feel connected to the sport. And ultimately, like with any sport, it needs to be entertaining. And this weekend we have 3 drivers fighting for the World Championship. That's the spectacle that people will tune in to watch.
And one of the most important vehicles of that entertainment was Netflix Drive to Survive, which I'm sure everybody has essentially seen that, where I know you might have known some of the people that were on many of those episodes. I've watched all of them.
For us, it's cringeworthy to watch, but I'm so glad that for so many others it was entertaining.
I'm surprised, Jamie, you didn't make a run for purchasing. I'm watching now, right? So Netflix is acquiring everything, right? So they're also acquiring they're working in exclusivity with Warner Brothers and Discovery. So I'm wondering how you think about Netflix and Drive to Survive and sort of the growth of the entertainment sector and what's happening with Warner Brothers Discovery and their potential merge. And as you think about it from an Authentic Brands Group standpoint, how the origination of brand really starts to evolve.
I think if Netflix does acquire Warner Brothers, it's a really smart move. Warner Brothers has a ton of great IP, IP is ultimately where it all starts, right? F1 created some great IP. At the end of the day, I don't think F1 would be where it is today without Drive to Survive. I think it would still be fine, but I don't think that you would see the valuations of where they are. Content drives commerce. It's kind of that simple. But what's going on, since COVID, like a lot of people sort of forget. I mean, COVID was not that long ago. We were all stuck inside our homes with our families, and we were locked up for a while. And what's happened is experience is now sort of taken over. Really, it's going twice as fast as it was in the past, and the younger generation are willing to spend, an enormous amount of money for that experience. That experience may be more important than the house. It may be more important than the car. There's a lot of things that the younger generation is going without to have a great experience. And I truly believe that that's because the content that is being produced, whether it's Netflix or it's Prime or it's HBO, I don't believe that we would want that experience if we didn't see what it was kind of like. So everybody wants to live the dream, and I think that's what we get from content. So I'll be very interested to see what Netflix ultimately does if they do acquire Warner Brothers, because it's not just about acquiring the IP, it's about creating the experience around the IP. So look, Disney, in my opinion, is probably the best out there, right? They create movies, they create content, and then you go to Disney World and Disneyland, and then you buy a lot of merchandise, right? So I'm going to continue to say content drives commerce. And I am curious to see if Netflix can actually take it from A to Z, or are they going to just buy that IP and miss out sort of the experience part? Because Warner Brothers has not been great at driving no pun intended, driving the experience side. I think that's where Warner Brothers has actually missed out.
And how do you drive IP with the athletes that you've worked with? Is this something that you just do internally, or is this something that you use maybe artificial intelligence for?
So we're an asset-light company where we actually license everything from A to Z, but we look for the best partners, best-in-class partners in every single category And we have focused tremendously in the last sort of 10 years at getting bigger into the entertainment side of the business, whether it's movies. So whether, I'm sure people have seen the David Beckham documentary or the Allen Iverson documentary, or we're doing now, we just created the Dunkman League, which, Shaquille O'Neal's the commissioner of the best dunkers in the world, and, you'll be able to watch it on TNT. So we are continuing to drive content, doing all these live events. That is, in my opinion, the driving force. Plus, we have about 700 million social media followers, and they drive an enormous amount of content for us as well.
So as you're thinking about your brands that you work with and so many amazing people, I can't wait to see the movie and can't wait to see the F1 race and watch Ben and some of your soccer teams. Danny, as you're thinking about it from an investor standpoint, are the valuations getting a little bit askew? Are we reaching the mountaintop where the cliff might fall? I mean, I know Jamie, as I'm looking at him, I know I can sense that he thinks that they're still going up. But you as an investor, how do you think about it?
I think Jamie's right in the fact that the experience economy is only going to grow, right? And sport is the ultimate experience. So when you look at industries that are going to get impacted by AI, I think sport, you can't change the human part of sport. That can never be taken away. No one's going to turn up and watch 11 robots play football. Some may say your teams, Ben, are playing like that at the moment.
Maybe one robot.
but NBA teams are 10 times.
Yeah, look,
teams
that's
10 times. Cricket.
I think there's some assets out there that are overpriced today. But I think in time, the valuations will start to reflect value. I think right now they're probably a little bit overcooked. But I think where we invest, we look at sports that have got very rich histories, that are very they're serving the biggest population bases of the world. They're skewing young, but they might be suffering a little bit of product apathy. And that's really because these sports have been around, the great sports have been around for 100 years, and they've been structured from a governance standpoint for 100 years. And their product doesn't change because they're not allowed to change the product. Whereas we look at sports now through a lens whereby you take all those fundamental strengths and then you go and alter the product slightly to cater to that younger audience, and then produce content around that product that's going to engage that audience. Because like any industry, you look at the customer lifetime value of a fan, and if you can get them young and then monetize them for the next 30, 40, 50 years in some form of direct-to-consumer relationship, then you're going to make money. I'm much more interested in a sport that we invest in engaging a 10-year-old than engaging me, right? Because that 10-year-old, if I get it right, I get the product right, I get the way I serve them right, then we're going to make money. So that's how we think about it. It's pretty simple.
You can also go right to Jamie and say, we're going to license. And he's the best at doing that. So when you think about it, Susie, they've said women's sports could hit almost $1 trillion valuation by 2030. Do you think that's close to being possible, or do you think that's a bit far-fetched, or do you think that's the other side of the mountain?
Women's sport is absolutely having a moment, and that's for sure one of the reasons why F1 Academy exists. And for those of you that don't know, it's an all-female race series owned by Formula One that races on the Grand Prix weekends 2 or 3 hours before Formula One. And having been in this sport nearly my whole life, I didn't ever think we would see a situation where young female drivers were given such a platform and such an opportunity. But Liberty recognized this growing female fan base they have. The fastest growing fan right now for Formula One is the 18 to 24-year-old female. And being quite a male-dominated sport, we need to speak to those new fans. We need to show them that the sport they love is not as male-dominated as it once was and doesn't live up to that old stereotype. So I got all the investment we needed to set F1 Academy up, but there's definitely an element, and I think that's the case in many women's sports. There comes a point where you need to also be financially sustainable. Are you selling enough tickets? Are you generating enough revenue to justify these valuations? Because it's something which is seen as having a lot of potential for the future. But I think mid to long term, we've got to make sure that there's a very strong foundation that will live up to where these valuations are coming from. And I certainly feel very grateful. I don't have a stadium to fill. I don't have a fan base to build up. We step on to one of the biggest and most recognized sporting platforms in the world. So I think other women's sports, is it realistic that they're going to sell enough tickets and fill a stadium? Is the revenue going to generate these valuations which are starting to get higher and higher in different sports? And you see now in the WNBA, there's a friction point where they're starting after 27 years to finally get recognition. But the players are now standing up and saying, well, it's not a charity anymore. We have an audience and we want to earn what we believe is fair. And obviously friction with the NBA that they're recognizing, well, the WNBA is creating its own fan base. So I think very interesting times for women's sports. I think definitely lots of potential, but there needs to be an element of caution that it's not just blown up with a hope. Because to Jamie's point, there needs to be the audience that's consuming the content. And if you don't get the eyeballs, it's very difficult to generate the business model.
Would you say that there are other new incumbents that are also positioned for long-term success, just like F1 Academy? Would you say that there are other maybe digitally native sports leagues that are starting to pop up? You know, you have Overtime, you have Unrivaled, you have Project B, you have TGL. I mean, there's a lot of new leagues that are starting to sort of be an asset-light sort of positioning and really kind of go after a community that is just attracted to them and will spend money with them. Or do you think they're more positioned for long-term success than legacy sports?
I'm not sure, because it's very difficult in a climate where there's so much great content to break through and actually make sure that you've got your own fan base and that fan base is growing. And you even see in the WNBA and in women's football in the US, but also the UK, the top teams and clubs, they can have a pretty strong business model, but that doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the league. So I think there's definitely an element where the potential is there, and I think the sports are entertaining to watch, especially if it's a big game. If you look at the UEFA Women's League, it was something that was 5 years ago not really followed, and now massively followed. And you have the brands coming in saying, well, if we are going to sponsor the men's UEFA Cup, we're absolutely going to be present for the women's UEFA Cup. So I do think the potential is very high, but I think there needs to be an element of caution. There's a lot of hype, and that's got to, at some point, turn into a very solid fan base that can generate revenue.
So Ben, is Ryan Reynolds your competitor because everybody's going to his games and they watch his TV show? Where's your TV show? And how are you going to outpace Ryan Reynolds?
I'm smarter than him and hopefully better looking. No, I think
we got that recording, right?
Yeah.
Someone tweet that out to him.
He's the bane of my existence, Ryan Reynolds. Now, if you buy a club anywhere in the world and you're American, it's, are you trying to do a Wrexham? And, you know, on the one hand, I think what they've done is remarkable. They also didn't inherit a club that came from nothing. I mean, that club had played in the Premier League. They have outsized kind of media exposure because of the networks that he and Rob bring to it. So certainly not trying to replicate what they're doing, but I have gotten, you know, the experiment I'm running right now in Saudi Arabia is how many boundaries can we break around football ownership? You know, how many rules can we test? And so, you know, my view is that with the decline of religion, with the social isolation that social media has brought us, where we now are keyed into our phones and not spending time in kind of community and in third spaces, sports is kind of that last convening mechanism to build community. And the problem we encountered in Saudi Arabia was you had most fans were really gravitating towards 4 large clubs. And it would be in England or in Germany, where you didn't have anyone who was a fan of a local club like Bochum or Paderborn. Everyone was gravitating towards the big three or four. And so my objective was, let's remake the fan experience in Saudi Arabia and try to break those walls between the ownership box and between the fans sitting in the stands. Let's go out to them and find them in their element. So I sit with the fans in the stands rather than sitting in the ownership box. I invite the fans for dinner. I engage with them and kind of crowdsource ideas around our logo, around stadium design, even around what players we should be going after in the transfer windows. And it's been a bit of a revolution because I think people never recognized that you could have that kind of engagement and involvement with ownership. And so it's been a really fun experience to pilot. And I think it's critical because when we start to build fans that are living and dying for the crest rather than tied to clubs just because of wins and losses or tied to clubs because of star power, we can create long-term fans. And so I think the Wrexham guys have done a great job of that, of reinvigorating a fan base that was kind of forgotten and lost. And we're trying to do that in leagues where no one had ever kind of brought fans into the ownership box before. And it's been a great revolution. I think it's something that hopefully will spread further around the league and across sport.
Well, I'd be glad to sit at dinner with you, and I'm sure a lot of other people would love to do the same thing. We could have actually another panel discussion sitting there. Did you ever invite Danny to join?
Yeah, you never took me up on it once.
Danny, you never came to dinner with Ben?
To be fair to him, we share an office, strangely enough. So we do. He does invite me to games, but unfortunately, I haven't been able to attend. But he's very generous.
I went with him to Kings League.
Yeah, it's true. He came to Kings League. He didn't go to the real football. Yeah.
What's one of the advice or one of the things that a fan said to you or what was the top thing that a fan said to you that you actually implemented?
They're incredible. The fans in Saudi Arabia, I think, have some of the highest football IQ in the world. And Saudi Arabia actually has the highest per capita fandom of football fans in the world, too. 75% of Saudis are football fans, whereas if you even go to Brazil, it's like 63%. Most European countries are mid-50s. France, which is a country that we think of as a footballing nation, is actually more of a rugby country than it is a footballing country. And so they have a very high IQ. I literally have fans coming up to me at matches and have printed out A4 papers, typed out line-by-line recommendations around how we compete in the league, what players we should be going after, what style of play we should run, what formations we should be running. And we've taken on board. Today, we actually use a crest even for our club that was designed by the fans. And we did that literally through just social media and engagement, largely on Twitter. And so the Saudis are voracious on social media. They spend more time on most social media channels like YouTube and others than anyone else on the planet. And so it gives us this really wonderful virtual community to engage and get feedback. But we integrate a lot of what they give us into our day-to-day operations.
So, Danny, did you invest in the team?
Not in his club, no. We have 4 other clubs in the league already.
I compete with him.
Yeah.
I compete with his parent company.
What's the record between the two of you?
Well, like I said, I've got 4 clubs, so that's a bit unfair. But I think just to back Ben up, though, I think what Ben's doing is unique. The 4 clubs we own are the 4 he referred to, the 4 big ones. And it's very hard to move big football clubs in directions he's moving his football club. And I think he may not be Ryan Reynolds, but when he walks around Riyadh, he's like the Pied Piper of all these young football fans, like following him around like he's Ryan Reynolds. But he genuinely is changing the way fans engage in football in Saudi Arabia, and you can't do that at our clubs, right? You just naturally can't do it. But I think what he's doing as a foreign owner coming in, and then dealing with the league as well, because the league is also set in its way. He's been doing the same things the same way for a long time, and being able to test and learn things in the environment that he's doing that is going to benefit everyone over the long run.
Jamie, how do you think about these new emerging sports markets against the ABG model? Going and talking to Ben about his team and licensing that category within the region, or even different places, especially the African continent, new sports as it starts to evolve in that space. I look at ABG and I see more stuff, in my opinion, obviously you're the expert and you're the owner, more domestic to the US, but how is ABG really globalized? Give us a sense of that, and how does this new sport economy move into your space?
So, look, a majority of our business is obviously in the apparel space and footwear and, a little bit of home. But what I would say to both these guys, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, 85% of all purchases today from a commerce standpoint is done by a woman. Maybe there's 50% males out there and 50% females out there, but 85% of the purchases are actually done by the female. So female is where I would focus a lot of effort and time on the female side of sport. I remember when UFC started with women and everyone was a little bit nervous. It's done very well. And I think when you look at the NBA, WNBA, it's done very well. When you look at tennis, there's just as many people watching women's finals as there is men's finals. So I actually think you're onto something really, really big. And we generally see when people, guys like you that are buying these teams, when you start focusing, a lot of your effort on the women's side, I think what you're going to see is your investment's going to go up substantially quicker than your investments on the men's side. And I also think that there's a lot more brand extension because women are involved. What you see is a lot of more commerce coming out of it, and a lot more brand extensions coming out of it. And let's be really honest, okay, about sport. Why do we all go to sporting events? We want to have a great experience, right? And what we're seeing from an experience standpoint is the nightlife, the day life. F1 is just getting better and better. Why? Because it has a ton of experience around it, right? There's a lot going on. And, you need females in that world to make that happen and for it to be exciting. So I don't know F1 today, but I think it's 40%.
42.
42% female fan base. So if I was investing in teams, which we don't buy teams, not yet anyway. So,
not yet.
And by the way, I know you're better looking than me, but I'm pretty good, okay? So if we were going to invest, from a team standpoint or a league standpoint, we would focus on the female side. And if you look at sort of Reebok, we bought Reebok, and we want to bring Reebok back into sport because Adidas took Reebok, out of sport, right? And Reebok became very big on the fashion side. But what we've done is we're going back into sport with Reebok. Specifically, we started with basketball. Where did we go? We went to Angel Reese. We went the female side. And why did we go to the female side? We thought that we could get a bigger lift, a faster lift by going in that direction. By the way, it really, truly worked, okay? We went with on the boxing side, we went with Taylor, right? So if you start sort of looking what's going on, the most successful, I think, team owners these days, they've invested, on the women's side, and it's working.
So there were those that see that trajectory, and they've invested there. And even in the NFL, as I played for 11 years, you start to see the fans change in the stadium.
Taylor Swift definitely helped that a lot. But we've seen a massive lift in fashion because of Taylor Swift, right? We used to sell, a lot of jerseys, but now all of a sudden there's just an enormous amount of fashion, okay, from coming out of the NFL, right? Abercrombie's in it, Aeropostale's in it, American Eagle's in it. All these retailers are jumping on the Taylor Swift bandwagon. So I think women in sport, is the driving force of what we got going on right now.
So for those that don't know, Taylor Swift, obviously, but he's married to Travis Kelce, who plays for the Kansas City Chiefs. And when you watch a game, it's just all focus on Taylor Swift. And the NFL is pretty ingenious in terms of the way that they sell. But you can also start to think about how the African continent and the youth will double by 2050, right? And so do you think that people are really taking into consideration the continent as a value? Because I think some people are really undervaluing it. What do you think, Jamie?
100%. I think that when you look at the Middle East, and I think the Middle East, and by the way, thank you to Abu Dhabi for having us here, and thank you, Mike Milken, for putting on this conference. But I've been coming here for a while. It's changed. It's changed dramatically. And I think that the Middle East is a proving fact that you can take an emerging market and build it. And if you build it, they will come. Now, it's a marathon. It's not a race. And I think that the Middle East is really had that strategy. And I think if, whether it's Africa or whether it's India, if you take these emerging markets and if they take a longer look at it, like they don't have to get it done in one day, and they build the structures and they build the stadiums and they build the fan base, I think we're going to see more explosion in a really good way. And I think pulling sort of a lot of this talent out of these countries helps a ton, right? Like, who's the number one baseball player in the world? Japan, right? Comes from Japan, okay? Ohtani has, done wonders for the sport. So I truly believe that, Africa is going to produce an enormous amount of great athletes on the women's side and on the men's side. And look, we're focusing now on Africa. We're putting people on the ground in Africa. And your ROI, it's not great right now, but it's early days. So I do think that people that go into those markets early, I think that they're going to see the returns are going to be very good, over the next decade.
Danny, are you all exploring or evaluating the growth of population on the African continent and where sports makes an impact?
Absolutely. I think when you're investing, you want to invest ahead of the cycle, right? If you can then benefit from that growth over time. Exactly, which is what we all want, right? But look, we've invested in America. We have the PFL Africa, which we launched on the back of Francis Ngannou's success in UFC and then into PFL, and he's in his native country, Cameroon. He's a national figure, right? And when we put on events down there, the appetite to engage is no different to anywhere else in the world. The return on capital at the moment, to your point, not quite as good as we would like, but it will come. You could go back, talk about women's sport again for a moment. We invested in women's football over the years, and when you look at the NWSL at the moment in the United States, they were giving teams away 5 years ago for free. They were paying people to take them off their hands. Now I think Alexis Ohanian, who is here somewhere, he sold out or sold a big stake in his Angel City club for $200 million valuation to Bob and Willow Iger. Like, that's insane. If you look at the multiples of revenue to get to that valuation, it's insane. Now, that was 0 5 years ago. So the growth opportunity is definitely there, and Africa is the same. India is going to be the same. I think China will come back around again because everything's cyclic. And, the Middle East is thriving at the moment, and to your point, I think it is the center of the universe from a growth perspective in sport. I think Africa's coming next. I think India's been bubbling away for a long time. Once it diversifies outside of cricket, it will continue to be impactful on the sports economy. But I do think China will come back. It's gone to sleep for probably a decade, but it's just too big and sport is too popular there for it not to be a serious player again sometime soon.
So we've talked about investors that have moved through the world of sports. We've talked about emerging economies, but the only thing we haven't talked about with the last couple of minutes is the athlete themselves and investing in sports. You have about 100 athletes that have equity within different sports platforms. How do we continue to push that forward, especially Susie, being a former driver yourself. How do we encourage more people to go into the boardroom, more people into advisory roles, more into investing? How do you contemplate that from your leadership position?
Well, I think in the world of Formula One, it's always challenging because when you're a driver in Formula One, you're the center of the universe. And when you stop driving, somebody else comes and takes your place and you become one of the ex-drivers. And so at the point where you're active, and if you take someone like Lewis Hamilton, I think he probably regrets not becoming a shareholder of the Mercedes team when he was there for 12 years and they had so much joint success. But I think also from the team's perspective, they will always be very hesitant to get too involved with one driver because in the end, that driver, when they're current, is hugely important. But then when the driver moves on, no longer. But I think there will be more and more let's say, drivers coming back into the sport in whatever role, because Formula One is, globally now more culturally relevant than just sportingly relevant. But I think in terms of ownership and investing, Formula One drivers are used to getting paid and not actually ever paying for something. So I'm not sure that's going to lead to much investing in the next years.
Well, hopefully I can encourage more players to invest and advise. I know a guy like Larry Fitzgerald, who played for the Cardinals, he invests and advises. Michael Strahan, who some people know, he invests and advises. Tom Brady's going to be in the region. He invests and advises, and we just need to have more players. So we're going to do a 30-second lightning round, just real quick. Ben, one sport that the world is sleeping on.
Football.
Okay. Jamie, which global brand would you buy tomorrow if money was no object?
One more time.
Which global brand would you buy tomorrow if money was no object?
Nike.
Ooh, Danny. One sports metric that you look at every day.
Participation.
And Susie, which racetrack in the world best represents your personality?
Oh, what a question to finish on. Suzuka.
Suzuka.
In Japan.
Thank you so much to the panel. I just wanted to say, sports has become the most powerful force shaping global identity, economic momentum, and cultural influence. I call it the soft power of the world. As we kind of went through our talk, vision is your compass, velocity is your engine, and victory is your legacy. So, of course, to the investors, athletes, and architects who master all three, won't just participate in the future of sports, they will ultimately define it. So thank you for all of you stepping into the arena with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dhani.